Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Aliens, posted by nelsyv. I had to excuse myself for a bit for the incredulous look I had been shooting the human commander, as we sat inside a makeshift military bunker somewhere outside of a place called New York, or something of that nature. I had to excuse myself for the look I was giving him, because to me, it was quite apparent that this little creature was out of its fecking mind. I picked that word up from them, by the way. Feck. Very therapeutic. They use it simply to emphasize or stress something. I've taken a liking to it. I think it'll catch on in the Ranger Corps, to be honest. Anyways, Battle of Earth. We were in deep crap. Our longtime adversaries, who'd we'd been engaging with on tens of thousands of worlds by this point in the Second Grand Galactic War. Somewhere around the 80-year mark, the Zetas had come to conquer Earth with a fleet of around 20 or so ships. Small scout fleet, but perfectly adequate for subjugating a pre-interplanetary species. Yeah, I know they had automated systems on others, but they had no transorbital presence worth mentioning. So whatever. At any rate, our fleet, a strike detachment of 7 vessels, had managed to follow the scout fleet to Earth. First time we met the humans, and boy, they were in a bad way. We were lending them a hand where we could, but our strike group containing 10 millions of hands and about 1 million at arms weren't making much headway. We were outmatched. Half the human population was dead, the other hiding. So, I'm sitting here in this bunker. This is 3 months after the first Zeta machine stepped foot on Earth, and half their world's governments surrendered. Those that didn't were almost promptly glassed all over. Most military forces were almost entirely neutralized in the first couple of weeks. The fact that any survived the first day within operation, given their technological level, speaks to their tenacity. At this point, our guys, the 7,056th Range Group, were fighting roughly 10-1 odds on Earth's surface. 2.5 months of non-stop fighting had really done a number on us. We were down to 3 capital ships. Our enemy had 13, one of which would take those 3 by itself. For the most part, it was hopeless. Reinforcements would likely not arrive for another month, and by that time, the last lines will have fallen. North America and Russia, I recall, still had some fight in them. They made what stands they could near the water, where they seemed to have the greatest advantages in terms of what they could field. But what this human was planning, it sounded completely out of a dream. He doesn't tell me. It's just a day ago that a piece of carbon byproduct called paper is handed to me, and I'm told to herd the enemy's vessels into one spot over New York. Why? How? Well, he explained to me the how. That's where our forces would gather, low and slow, our final cinematic battle in the ruins of an old capital city. So our enemy, the Zeta, and their massive ships obliged. We brought a cruiser and 2 frigates into low orbit, a defensive line. Their small carrier group swept in low from the east, just like the human generals had said they would. Almost eerie to think about. It's odd for a dehemic sub-captain like me to be taking orders from a species 2 technological orders lower. But with their level of insane confidence and the fact that our odds were as good as suicidal no matter what, I had basically given up at this point. I resisted protesting when he told me to, get this, willingly cede the atmospheric edge by pulling a few ships back when they got towards the coastline. He wanted to let them converge within visual range of their final fecking defensive line, with many ships wielding weapons that wielded enough destructive force to level an entire plane from one horizon to the other. Completely unthinkable that they would so easily congregate their species' last remnants to defend these ruins, like throwing yourself onto a pile of blades. But the human commanders were insistent. Let them come over the waters. They told me, push your ships over the top of them. He told me, keep them over the water. I heard nothing else on this matter, save for the reference to what was apparently human ships. I know now, as the dreaded hour approaches, how insane the humans have been driven, as they direct phantom fleets of boats. Not a single human vessel still sailed, all of their minute steel islands, trudging with all the speed of falling snow through the water, had been sunk in the first hours of the war. And here were these delirious commanders speaking in hushed English and Russian and French to one another, directing a phantom fleet into the bay as if to flank a goddamn Zeta Armada with steel boats, which they no longer had. It was hilarious, and I began to laugh more and more with the smoking men and their haughty women as the night passed over us. The Zeta fleet had swooped in just as expected. Over the horizon at dawn, the sun at their backs. Today would be the last day, I thought to myself, that humans would ever get to see their own sun rise. Tomorrow, it would be the Zeta's sun, and their Earth. My Rangers, what was left of the combat arms, about 27,000 soldiers, took up arms, around 115,000 or so human soldiers. As you know, a human, their race having barely made any headway in genetic engineering or synthetic body augmentation, were fairly weak. They average a couple heads shorter and are about a third of our weight on average. They've less muscle and is less efficient too. We reverse engineered what we could for them of our power armor and weapons, since no infantry arms they had that were not specified to be anti-tank were worth anything on the Zeta infantry drone. But they were still lagging behind. I ran a six-clawed hand over my red scales, humming an old tune that reminded me of home as I watched my soldiers heft their 16mm automatic railguns, something which I was told was like an assault rifle, but with the power of an anti-material rifle, alongside the humans and their 50 cals and other outdated equipment. It was to be a brave stand, but the best we could hope for was to give the enemy a bit of trouble before they ground the last bit of human resistance into the dirt. I wonder if a human poet would write about this one day, if any would live. The first shots ring out at what is locally 0:15 hours. What were once ruins and buildings became ruins of ruins. Lasers and missiles and plasma mortar fire rains all over our defenses, and with my ships doing their best to corral the superior fleet where the humans wanted it, the entire ordeal was no less than a nightmare. It eventually came to be that, I was told, as my dare and the human men began to fight hand to hand and blade to blade in the dusty hellhole of New York with the mechanical friends, that this was an optimal position. I laughed again, as was my nature, nodding and accepting wholeheartedly, as I was told to push hard down on their ships with my own. Sure, why not? I gave the order. And my ships were soon raining down intensely on the Zeta ships, receiving a pounding in return. I lost one frigate very quickly, though I managed to cripple a couple of their own vessels. One fell into the water even. It was now 5-1 odds against my battle group, who could now barely do anything but watch as the enemy ships redirected their full force of their repulsion shielding towards them. I groaned and told the human commander that this is exactly what I had anticipated when we seeded our atmospheric defense. With their shielding at full, the enemy ships were free to exert influence directly over the battlefield. We had around 15 minutes to live at this point, but the commander cut me off here and smiled the most peculiar smile. "We know our fleets are in position. Thanks for your help." He offered me a hand, fecking insane humans with their phantom fleets. I took it earnestly, grinning stupidly as I waited for the inevitable death and looked out over the bay. And that's when I saw it. From beneath the enemy task force, which was barely half a kilometer over the water, grouped so tightly they looked ready to bump into each other, surfaced a series of small metal islands. I nearly went limp in disbelief as they opened up like metallic sea creatures. There must have been at least 30 of these things, each perfectly positioned beneath the enemy vessels. It happened so quickly, I could barely register. But in an instant, hundreds of vapor trails sprung from the tops of them, and the human commander, a Russian to my left, nonchalantly advised me to avert my eyes a moment as he poured gin down his throat. I couldn't, though, but it was well worth going blind to my left eye to witness the sight of over 100 missiles of design so archaic it was childish, smash into the naked underbellies of the massive floating warships. The flash, the heat, it was incredible. Even from outside the fortifications, one after another, nuclear blasts rippled and melted through the armor of the enemy ships, their repulsion shield generators slagged before power could be diverted to them. I stood motionless. The battle had stopped. Over the course of only a few minutes, the ships, one of which was a 2-mile-long carrier vessel, simply failed and gave in to their weight 11 enemy ships, all crippled in the span of a couple seconds by a species that couldn't even figure out how the centers of black holes work. It dawned on me only later that day as I led my battalion into the heart of Alston, the Russian tank division on one flank of me, and a NATO flight of Apache attack helicopters overhead, to push back against the now fading line that had been pushing north from the South Americas, that this was now a winning battle. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.